Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into something pretty significant, this whole concept of unreached people groups.
Yeah, it's a big
We're
topic.
looking at some excerpts from a document called What Does the Bible Say About Unreached People Groups?
Right.
And our goal, really, for this deep dive is to get a handle on the biblical thinking behind prioritizing these groups and, the urgency the source talks about.
It's pretty sobering when you look at the numbers, isn't it? I mean, the source points out over 3 billion people with basically little to no chance of hearing this particular message.
3 billion. Wow.
Yeah, that alone tells you why it's, well, important to understand.
Absolutely. So let's dive in. The source kicks off with the Great Commission, Matthew 28.1, go and make disciples of all nations. Familiar word.
Very familiar.
But the source says, point blank, this job isn't finished. What's the key takeaway they're pushing there?
Well, the emphasis is really on that phrase, unfinished task. It's framed not just as like a historical command, but something active, ongoing.
Yeah.
For everyone.
For every believer.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. And it highlights a mismatch. The groups with the least opportunity often get the fewest resources, the fewest people focused on them.
That's a stark contrast. So, okay, that leads right into the definition. Unreached people groups. What does the source mean by that? It's got to be more than just people far away, right?
Exactly. It's not primarily about geography. The source defines them as groups with minimal or basically no realistic shot at hearing the gospel in a way they can understand within their own culture.
Minimal or no realistic shot.
Yeah, it's about access.
Right.
Often it means there's no real indigenous group of believers, nobody within their own people group to share the message naturally.
Ah, okay.
And at the same time, there are few, if any, outsiders, missionaries, actively working to bridge that cultural and language gap. It's a communication barrier, really.
A profound lack of access then. Okay, so the source digs into why this focus, why prioritize these groups biblically. It starts with John 3.16, God's love for the world. How does that connect?
Well, the source kind of draws a line from that universal love. If God loves the whole world, like John 3.16 says so powerfully, then that love must extend to those who haven't even heard about it yet, right? It poses the question, doesn't that huge love compel us to make sure everyone gets a chance to hear?
It's a strong point. Then there's God's impartiality. The source hints at Acts, God is not a respecter of persons. How does that fit in?
That just reinforces it, doesn't it? If God himself doesn't show favoritism based on ethnicity or where you're born,
right,
then his offer of salvation shouldn't be restricted either. So the argument seems to be that focusing on the unreached reflects God's own heart, his desire for all kinds of people to know him.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's Jonah, the Ninevites, specifically the bit about them not being able to tell their right hand from their left. Seems like an odd detail.
It does on the surface, but the source uses it, I think, to show their deep spiritual confusion. Like they lack basic understanding of spiritual truth, of God's ways.
Ah, like a metaphor for being lost.
Exactly. And God's compassion on them, way back then, serves as this early example of his concern for people who are just unaware, spiritually disoriented.
Interesting. Okay. And Isaiah 65.1 is quoted, I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. That seems counter.
The initiative. He doesn't just wait for people to figure it all out and come looking. He actively reaches out, even to those who aren't asking, who don't even know what to ask.
So it justifies proactive mission.
Precisely. It underlines God's own desire to be known, pushing outwards to those who haven't heard.
Moving to the New Testament, Jesus' mission to seek and save the lost. In Matthew 24.14, this gospel will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations. Now, source makes a big deal about nations there.
Yes, Greek word ethne.
Right. Not political countries, but ethnic groups, people groups. Why is that distinction so vital here?
Oh, it's huge. Because if you just think nations means, like France or Brazil, you might think, okay, the gospel is in those countries, job done.
Yeah, check the box.
But ethne means all the distinct linguistic, cultural groups within those borders. Reaching a country politically doesn't mean you've reached every unique people group inside it. Not even close, often.
That really changes the scope of the task.
Massively.
Okay, so the source links this to Romans. 10 people need to hear to believe, so someone needs to be sent.
And then Matthew 9, Jesus saying, pray for laborers.
Right. What's the logic chain they're building?
It's pretty straightforward, really. Paul says in Romans, belief comes from hearing. Hearing comes from preaching. Preaching requires someone being sent.
Okay.
And Jesus himself tells us to pray for more people to be sent into that harvest field. It shows this active participation required from believers. We have a role in sending, in praying, so that people can hear.
Got it. Now, the Apostle Paul comes up as a key example. A prototype cross-cultural missionary, the source calls him.
Yeah, that's a good description.
His big ambition, Romans 15, was to preach where Christ wasn't known. What's highlighted about his approach?
What stands out is that deliberate focus. He wasn't just, doing follow-up visits. His goal, his ambition, as he put it, was pioneering, breaking new ground.
Like that quote from Isaiah he uses in Romans 15.
Those who were not told about him will see, and those who have not heard will understand. That sums up his passion perfectly, doesn't it? Reaching the completely unreached.
Yeah, it really does. And the source also points to 2 Corinthians 10, his desire to preach in the regions beyond. Again, that intentionality. Why keep hammering that point?
I think the source uses Paul to establish this strong biblical precedent. It's saying, look, this isn't a new idea. A key figure, maybe the key missionary figure, prioritized precisely this, going where the message simply wasn't available.
So it wasn't just about spreading out, it was about reaching the unreached specifically.
That seems to be the argument. His journeys were strategically aimed at people groups with no access otherwise.
Okay, so finally, the source looks at the end game, the ultimate goal, and the urgency. It points to Revelation 5.9, that song about people purchased for God from every tribe and language and people and nation.
Powerful image.
And it connects this to Jesus getting the full reward he deserves. What about those 4 terms? Tribe, language, people, nation. Why list them all out like that?
Well, using all 4 really emphasizes the completeness, the total scope of God's plan, doesn't it? It's not just random individuals, but people representing every conceivable human grouping, every culture, every language.
Total inclusion.
Exactly. Maybe the repetition is just to drive home the sheer diversity that God intends to bring together.
Yeah.
It paints this picture of Jesus receiving worship from absolutely everywhere, from all these distinct groups.
And Revelation 7.9 echoes that, right? The huge crowd from every nation, tribe, people, and language.
Yeah, another glimpse of that final reality.
So the source kind of loops back then, saying reaching all these ethne is still the unfinished task, connecting it right back to Matthew 28 and Acts 1.8, Jesus' last instructions.
It ties it all together.
And there's even a mention, based on how the source reads 2 Peter 3.21, that finishing this task, making disciples of every people group, might even sort of hasten Christ's return.
Yeah, the source brings that up as a possibility drawn from Peter. It adds another layer of, urgency. The idea is that God's ultimate plan involves redeeming people from every group. Seeing that future picture in Revelation makes the present task seem even more critical. So our involvement isn't just obedience, it's actively participating in fulfilling God's big picture plan. And yeah, maybe even looking forward to hastening that final day.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive really highlights, based on this material, this massive ongoing need, billions in unreached groups without real access.
Yeah, a huge need.
And the source presents the strong biblical case for why prioritizing them matters, rooted in the Great Commission, God's character, Paul's example, and that ultimate vision in Revelation.
Absolutely. The scale, those billions, it can feel, overwhelming. But understanding the biblical reasoning, the urgency the source describes, gives a framework. It helps make sense of why this is such a focus and global mission.
It really does. And it definitely leaves us and you listening with something to chew on, doesn't it? What does it actually mean to be part of this unfinished task? How could really grasping this perspective, shape how you see the world, maybe your own part in it?
Good questions.
Wow.
Lots to reflect on there.
For sure. Well, thanks for digging into this with us today.